This isn't a movie. It's a real story from the suburbs of America, where one woman turned heartbreak into a headline. By the time the sirens arrived, nobody could believe what they saw. The air in our small suburban home was thick with the scent of betrayal. I had found the messages the night before. Her name was Tiffany. She sent him pictures. He sent her promises. The kind he never gave me anymore. I did not scream. I did not cry. Instead, I smiled. That quiet, cold kind of smile that hides a storm beneath it. The next morning, the house was still. He was in the shower, humming some song he used to play for me. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. My heart pounded like footsteps on hollow wood. Then I saw it. The small bottle on the counter. His special lube. The one he never used with me. An idea crawled into my mind. It whispered. It burned. I reached under the sink and found a bottle of industrial glue. Clear. Thick. Odorless. Perfect. My hands shook as I poured the glue into his lube bottle. The smell stung my nose. I wiped the counter clean. Not a trace left. That evening, he left early. Said he had to work late. I watched him drive away, his car vanishing down the dark street. My chest felt hollow, but my lips curved upward. Hours later, I got a call. A strange number. A woman's voice screamed through the phone. Something about pain. Something about being stuck. Then came the sirens. The flashing red and blue danced against my window blinds. I stepped outside, pretending to be curious. Neighbors gathered in robes and slippers. The firefighters rushed into the house across the street. Her house. Tiffany's house. From inside came yelling. A man's voice. My husband's voice. Raw, desperate, and filled with agony. The sound made my skin tingle. I felt the chill of the night bite at my arms. The metallic scent of diesel and sweat hung in the air. The neighbors whispered. I watched the scene unfold under the flickering streetlight. Then I saw them wheel him out on a stretcher. He was pale. She was beside him, clutching a blanket to her chest, eyes wild with shame. The firefighters looked shaken. One of them muttered, "Never seen anything like it." I stood there, arms folded. The cold wind brushed through my hair. He caught my eyes as they loaded him into the ambulance. His lips parted, no words, just horror. And I smiled again. That same quiet smile. The one that began everything. The next morning, the whole neighborhood buzzed. Police cars still lined the curb. News vans idled at the corner, cameras pointed at Tiffany's house. Someone had already posted about it on Facebook. By noon, it was on the local news. Local couple hospitalized after bizarre bedroom accident. That was the headline. They blurred the faces, but everyone knew. Everyone always knows. I sat on the porch with my coffee, the steam curling into the cold morning air. My hands trembled, not from guilt, but from the quiet thrill of justice. The kind no court could ever deliver. A reporter walked up the sidewalk. He asked if I knew them. I looked at him, my eyes heavy with false innocence. "I think they moved here last year," I said softly. Then I went back inside before he could ask more. The silence of the house wrapped around me. It felt strange. Empty, but safe. I walked through the rooms, each one whispering memories of a marriage that died long ago. His jacket still hung by the door. His cologne lingered on the fabric. I pressed my face against it, breathing in the faint trace of him. It no longer hurt. It just felt done. Later that day, my sister called. She had seen the news. Her voice was sharp, half laughing, half horrified. "Girl, please tell me you didn't." I said nothing. She went quiet. Then she whispered, "You always were the calm one." The hospital called that evening. They needed consent forms. He had listed me as his emergency contact. The irony cut deep. I drove there anyway. The hospital lights were too bright, too clean. The smell of antiseptic burned my throat. I saw him through the glass window. He was pale, tubes running from his arm. Tiffany sat beside him, her face red and swollen from crying. When she saw me, she froze. I walked closer. Her lips trembled. I could see the fear in her eyes, she knew. I leaned toward her, my voice low, steady. Some things, I said, just do not wash off. She flinched. Then I turned and walked away. Outside, the cold air hit me like a wave. The parking lot glistened under the flickering streetlights. A storm was coming, the kind that shakes windows and drowns secrets. But I was calm. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not happy. Not vengeful. Just free. The next day, reporters knocked again. I never opened the door. They wanted drama. They wanted the woman behind the story. But they would never know her. Because she was already gone. The woman who loved him. The woman who waited. The woman who cried. Now there was only me. And a silence that felt like peace. Some nights, I still hear the sirens in my dreams. The echo of his screams. The sound of glue tearing skin. And I smile in the dark. Not out of cruelty. But because sometimes karma just needs a little help finding its way home. Weeks passed. Winter crept into the edges of everything. Cold mornings, darker nights, and a quiet that hummed through the walls. I had thought the story would fade. That people would move on. But America does not move on that easily anymore. It started with a whisper online. A neighbor posted a photo. Then came the Reddit threads. The YouTube reactions. Podcasts. TikTok stories with dramatic music and captions that screamed, "The Lube Lady of Lakewood." They made it sound like a movie. Some called me a hero. Some called me insane. But everyone watched. I would see my own house in the background of news footage. The mailbox. The porch swing he built one summer when he still said he loved me. Every detail of my life was suddenly everyone's entertainment. The mail began piling up, letters from strangers. Women thanking me. Men cursing me. A few even asked for interviews. I threw most of it away. But some of those letters made me cry. One woman wrote, "My husband cheated for 6 years. I wish I had your courage." I read that one 3 times. Then folded it neatly and kept it in my nightstand. But fame, if you can call it that, has a way of rotting what is left of peace. One night, I came home to find reporters parked outside again. Cameras flashing like lightning. Voices shouting my name. I locked the door, closed the blinds, and sat on the floor. The noise outside was a storm I could not escape. For every person who praised me, another called me a monster. Crazy glue lady. Psycho wife. Domestic terrorist. They forgot about Tiffany's betrayal. They forgot his lies. They only saw the aftermath. They saw the fire, not the spark that started it. Days later, the hospital called again. He had been discharged. They said he wanted to talk to me. Against every part of my better judgment, I went. When I saw him, he was not the same man. The arrogance was gone. His voice cracked when he said my name. His hands shook when he tried to hold mine. He started to apologize, but I stopped him. I told him he could keep a sorry. That word had no meaning left between us. Then he said something that froze my blood. "She still visits me." "Tiffany?" I asked. He nodded. "Every day. But she looks at me like she hates me now. Like she blames me for everything." I wanted to tell him she should. But instead I whispered, she should blame herself. When I left the hospital, snow had begun to fall. Soft. Silent. Relentless. The flakes melted against my cheeks, and for the first time, I let myself cry. Not for him. Not for what I had done. But for the version of myself that once believed love could not turn into something so dark. That night, I lit a candle on the kitchen counter. The flame danced in the reflection of the window, small but alive. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. The internet still buzzed with my name. People debated my morals, my sanity, my soul, but none of them knew the truth. They did not hear the nights I spent alone, listening to his laughter in another woman's house. They did not see the texts that tore holes in my chest. They did not live my silence. I closed the laptop and took a deep breath. The house creaked softly, as if it too was exhaling. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, I sat in the glow of the candle, warm and unshaken. Maybe America would keep talking. Maybe they would make another documentary or a movie. Maybe people would keep asking why I did it. But I knew the truth. I did it because pain needs a witness. And sometimes, justice does not come with handcuffs. Sometimes it comes with glue. Months slipped by like slow rain on glass. Winter turned to spring, and the world began to thaw. But the whispers never really stopped. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes following me. In the grocery store, at the coffee shop, even at church, where the pastor hesitated before shaking my hand. Some looked at me with admiration, others with quiet disgust. But no one dared to ask me how I was. Because in America, people love a scandal more than a survivor. They would rather talk about what you did than why you broke. I tried to move forward. I repainted the house, tore down the pictures, sold the bed where I used to lie awake wondering who he was with. Every stroke of the brush felt like washing away a ghost. But ghosts cling tighter than memory. One evening, I got a letter with no return address. Just my name written in thick black ink. Inside was a single photograph. Him, in a physical therapy room. A scar visible down his leg. And beside him, her, Tiffany. They were sitting apart, but their hands were almost touching. On the back, a message scrawled in his handwriting. Please forgive me. My stomach twisted. Not with anger, but with something heavier. Regret, maybe. Or the ghost of love that refused to die quietly. I sat there for a long time, the photo trembling in my hands. The sun was setting outside, bleeding orange light through the blinds. I realized forgiveness is not a gift for them. It is a door you open for yourself. But I was not ready to walk through it yet. The next day, I drove to the lake just outside town. The one where he used to take me when we were still happy. The water shimmered under the pale spring sky. Children laughed in the distance. A couple held hands near the pier. Life moved on, even when hearts did not. I took the photo and set it on the water. Watched it drift away. The paper curled, soaked, and slowly disappeared beneath the ripples. And for the first time, I did not feel anger. Only release. Weeks later, I found an email from a producer. They wanted to make a documentary about the glue incident. They promised sensitivity, accuracy, respect. But I knew what that meant. They wanted ratings, drama, shock, America's favorite flavors. I never applied. Instead, I wrote my own story. Not for them. Not for fame. For me. For every woman who has stared at betrayal and chosen to reclaim her power. Even if it meant becoming the villain in someone else's story. As I wrote, the memories poured out like a storm finally breaking. The smell of glue. The flash of sirens. The cold night air on my skin as I stood beneath those red and blue lights. And the silence afterward. The kind that fills a home once love has burned out completely. By the time I finished, dawn was breaking. The first light spilled across the page, and I felt something shift inside me. Not joy. Not sorrow. Just peace. A few months later, I heard he left town. No forwarding address. No new phone number. He vanished like a chapter that finally ended. And I was still here. Still breathing. Still standing in the same house, but it no longer felt like a prison. Sometimes I still hear people talk about me. In the supermarket line. On the radio. On late-night talk shows where they laugh about what I did. But I do not care anymore. Because they only know the story. I lived the pain. And in this country, where heartbreak becomes headlines and betrayal becomes entertainment, I learned something they will never understand. You can lose everything. Your marriage, your reputation, your peace. And still, somehow, find yourself standing in the wreckage, stronger than before. Because sometimes, the fire that destroys your life is the same one that forges your freedom. Years passed. The story faded from the news, but not from memory. Every now and then, an old clip resurfaced online. Someone would tag it "justice served" or "crazy wife moment." The internet never truly forgets. But I had learned to live with that. I moved to a smaller town in the Midwest. Quiet. Peaceful. Where no one knew my name and no one cared to ask. The kind of place where people wave from their porches and bake pies for strangers. It felt like another life. Like a second chance I did not think I deserved. I opened a small flower shop on Main Street. Wild Grace. The name came to me one night while I was staring at the stars. Because that was what I had become. Wild and free, but still trying to find grace in the chaos I had created. Every morning, I unlocked the door and breathed in the scent of lilies, roses, and soil. That smell was therapy. It reminded me that beauty could still grow from broken ground. Then one spring morning, the bell over the door rang. I looked up, expecting another local customer ordering flowers for Easter. But it was him. My heart stopped. His hair was grayer. His face thinner. He moved with a slight limp. But those eyes, they were the same.
Guilty.
Haunted. Human. He stood there for a long moment before speaking. "Hi," he said softly. My hands trembled on the counter. The sound of his voice stirred memories I had buried deep. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "I found out where you moved," he said. "I just wanted to see you. One last time." He pulled a small envelope from his jacket. Inside was a photograph. Tiffany, smiling in a hospital bed, holding a newborn baby. "She had the baby," he whispered. "She said it was mine." But it wasn't. I stared at the photo. The child's eyes were blue.
Hers were brown.
His were green. He did not need to explain more. "She left a few months later," he said. "Moved out west. Never looked back." He paused. "I guess we both know what that feels like." The air between us felt thick. Years of pain pressed against the silence. Finally, he looked up, tears in his eyes. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted to tell you that you were right. About everything." For a long time, I said nothing. Outside, the wind rattled the chimes by the door. I thought of all the nights I cried, all the anger, all the fire that once lived inside me. But now, standing there, I felt none of it. Only a deep, aching sadness for the people we used to be. "I stopped hating you a long time ago," I said quietly. He closed his eyes, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. "That's more than I deserve," he whispered. He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, I said, "Wait." He stopped, his hand on the handle. I walked around the counter, handed him a white rose, and said, "This one's for peace." He looked at it for a long time, then nodded. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. And then he walked out of my life again. When the door closed behind him, the shop felt different. Lighter. Like something inside me had finally unclenched. That night, I stood outside under the wide American sky. The stars stretched across the horizon like quiet witnesses. I realized I was no longer the woman who poured glue into a bottle out of rage. I was someone reborn through pain, through consequence, through survival. America had turned my story into gossip, but I had turned it into strength. And maybe that was the real ending. Not revenge, not regret, but redemption. Because even in a world that loves to watch women fall, there's power in standing back up, covered in scars, but still holding your own peace. 10 years later, my hair had turned silver at the edges. The little flower shop had grown into something more, a quiet sanctuary for broken hearts. People came from nearby towns just to sit among the blooms, to breathe, to cry. Some said there was peace in the air. But the truth was, the peace was something I had built, petal by petal. One afternoon, a young woman entered. She looked about 25. Eyes red, hands shaking. She clutched her phone like it held the whole world's weight. "I'm sorry," she said, voice trembling. "I just needed somewhere to go." I offered her tea. We sat in the back room among buckets of hydrangeas and tulips. The air smelled of rain and soil. She told me her story. Her boyfriend cheated. Her friends told her to get even, to ruin him, to burn everything. As she spoke, I saw my younger self in her. The same rage, the same heartbreak that leaves you gasping for air. I took a deep breath. "Revenge feels like control," I said. "But it is a fire that burns your own hands first." Her tears fell quietly. She nodded, like she wanted to believe me, but did not know how. Before she left, she asked me something that stopped my heart. "Are you her?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. The woman from that story. The glue story. I froze. For years, I had buried that identity under soil and roses. But the internet never forgets. I could have denied it, but I did not. Yes, I said softly. Her eyes widened. She did not look disgusted. She looked curious. Did it make you feel better? She asked. I paused for a long time before answering.
No, I said.
It made me feel powerful for a moment, but peace did not come from that. Peace came from what I did after. She smiled weakly. Then she hugged me, tight, trembling, real. When she left, I stood there, surrounded by the smell of roses and fresh beginnings. That was the day I decided it was time to speak. Weeks later, I sat in a small studio in Chicago, across from a podcast host. She was young, bold, American to the core, the kind of woman who spoke truth without flinching. She had read every article about me, every rumor, every opinion. But she wanted my story, not the internet's. I hesitated before the microphone. My palms were sweaty. The sound of the producer counting down echoed in my ears. Then the red light blinked on. Tell us, she said, her voice calm, curious. Who is the woman behind the glue? I inhaled slowly. And for the first time, I told the truth. I spoke about the loneliness, the quiet betrayal that eats at you like rust on metal. The night I found out, the anger that tasted like acid in my throat, and the decision that changed everything. But I did not stop there. I told them about what came after, about learning to forgive without forgetting, about building something new out of the ruins, about turning scandal into strength. By the time I finished, tears ran down the host's cheeks. When the episode aired, it spread faster than I expected, not because of the shock, but because of the honesty. Women from across the country wrote to me. Mothers, divorcees, college girls learning love the hard way. They said my story made them feel seen, not for the revenge, but for the recovery. I started speaking publicly at shelters, women's groups, small-town libraries. I did not preach revenge. I preached renewal. Because in America, we love stories of revenge, but what we really need are stories of resurrection. Years later, I returned to that same lake, the one where I had let the photograph drift away. The sky was golden, the water calm. I felt the wind lift my hair, and the weight of everything finally slip from my shoulders. For the first time, I whispered out loud, I forgive you. Not for him.
For me.
The words floated into the air, carried away like seeds in the wind. And I realized this was my true ending. Not the night of sirens and shame. Not the headlines. Not the whispers. But this quiet moment of peace. Standing under the wide, endless American sky. Where even broken things can bloom again. 0.5 more years passed. The lake had become my sacred place. Every birthday, every hard anniversary, I came back. It was where my story ended once and began again. By then, the flower shop had grown into something far bigger than I ever imagined. Wild Grace was no longer just a store. It had become a community, a place where people came to rebuild their hearts one bouquet at a time. Mothers came after divorces. Veterans brought flowers for the ones they lost. Teenagers with first heartbreaks came in trembling, asking how to stop the ache. And somehow I always had the right flower, the right story, the right silence.
Then one morning a letter arrived.
Thick envelope, cream paper. The return address, Harper and Grant Publishing, New York City. Inside was a simple note. We have heard your story. America has too. We believe your voice could help others heal. Would you consider writing a memoir? For a moment, I just stared at it. All those years, I had been running from the story that once defined me. Now the world wanted me to tell it. But this time it would be on my terms. That night, I sat by my window, listening to the crickets hum under the summer moon. I thought about all the pain, the scandal, the silence that followed. And I realized something I had not before. What destroyed me once had also remade me. So I began to write. Every morning, before opening the shop, I sat with coffee and memory. I wrote about love that turned sour, about nights too quiet to bear, about the sirens, the screams, the neighbors watching behind their blinds. But I also wrote about rebuilding,
About peace.
about forgiveness blooming like spring after a long, bitter winter. The words poured out like rain, raw, imperfect, real. I titled it The Things We Glue Back Together. When it was published, I expected little. Maybe a handful of readers, maybe quiet sympathy. But the book caught fire. Not because of the scandal, but because of the truth. Women across the country wrote letters, not to praise what I had done, but to thank me for surviving it out loud. Book clubs in Kansas and California discussed it. Daytime talk shows quoted it. College students wrote essays about it. Some said it was dark. Some said it was brave. But no one could ignore it. Then one night, I was invited to a live television interview in New York. The host smiled, that polished American smile that hides curiosity and judgment at the same time. She leaned forward and asked, "If you could go back, would you still do it?" The studio went silent. The audience leaned in. The cameras waited. I took a deep breath. "No," I said softly. "I would not do it again. But I would not erase it either. Because without that moment, I would never have learned what freedom really costs." The host blinked. The audience stayed quiet. Then a woman in the front row began to clap. Then another. And another. Until the room filled with a slow, thunderous applause that shook something deep inside me. After the show, an older woman approached me. Her hands were trembling. She whispered, "My husband cheated on me 40 years ago. I never forgave him. But tonight, I think I finally can." I hugged her,
Tight.
like I was holding my younger self in her arms. That was when I realized my story had stopped being about glue a long time ago. It had become about healing, about how pain, even the ugliest kind, can become purpose. Years later, when I finally retired, I donated the shop to a local women's shelter. They turned it into a workshop space, teaching women how to build small businesses, how to stand again after heartbreak, how to start over. On the last day, as I locked the door one final time, I looked around the empty shop. The air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I whispered a quiet thank you to the walls, to the flowers, to the silence that had once saved me. Then I drove back to the lake. The sky was orange and pink, the kind of sunset that looks too perfect to be real. I sat on the old pier, toes brushing the cool water, and let the wind carry the scent to the earth. I closed my eyes and smiled. Somewhere behind me, life went on. Cars, laughter, music drifting from a distant house. But in that moment, I felt nothing but peace. I had been the broken wife, the scandal, the villain, the survivor. And now, finally, I was just a woman who had learned to live again. Because in this country, where stories rise and fall like waves, sometimes the most American thing you can do is fall apart in public and still find the courage to grow back stronger. I thought about how far I had come, from the night of betrayal and chaos, to the quiet mornings of rebuilding, to the stage lights of redemption. My story had become America's mirror. People saw their own heartbreaks, their own rage, their own rebirths reflected in it. And maybe that was the point. We are all just trying to glue our lives back together. In kitchens, in marriages, in small towns, and in big cities. As the snow fell harder, I whispered a prayer. Not for him, not for her, but for everyone who has ever been broken and thought it was the end. Because it never is. Sometimes it is only the beginning. When I stood up, the wind carried the last of my words across the frozen lake. The sky began to lighten, soft streaks of pink spreading like forgiveness itself. And for the first time, truly, deeply, I felt whole. Because this was not a story about glue. It was a story about letting go. And in the heart of America, under a sky that has watched both my rage and my redemption, I finally learned you do not need to hold things together forever. You just need to heal enough to let them fall apart in peace. Years later, I am an old woman sitting on that same wooden pier. The lake glimmers under a wide autumn sky, gold leaves drifting like memories on the wind. My hands are thinner now, lined with time, but they still remember how to hold both flowers and forgiveness. The film came and went. The book lived its season. People stopped recognizing me on the street. The world found new stories to chase, new scandals, new heartbreaks. And I am glad. I still get letters sometimes. Women who watch the movie late at night, tears running down their faces. They tell me they left someone who broke them, or that they stayed and learned to heal. Every story different. Every heart the same. I keep the letters in a box under my bed, not because I need to remember what happened, but because they remind me why it mattered. The truth is, I do not think of that night much anymore. Not the glue. Not the screams. Not the flashing lights painting the walls red and blue. I think instead of what came after. The garden I built. The women I helped. The peace I fought for quietly, every single day. When I close my eyes, I can still feel the breeze from that night so long ago. Cold, biting, electric. But now, when it brushes against my face, it feels like a whisper saying, "You made it." The lake ripples gently. Somewhere far behind me, a car passes, a dog barks. Life continues. And I smile, because this is what the end of a storm feels like. Not silence, but stillness. Not revenge, but redemption. America may remember me for the scandal, but I will remember myself for the survival, for the love I found after the wreckage, for the peace that grew in the cracks of everything I once destroyed. I rise slowly, my knees stiff, but my heart light. The sky is turning orange, fading into dusk. I whisper one last thank you to the water,
To the wind.
to the life that somehow I managed to glue back together. Then I turn away from the lake, the story that once defined me fading softly behind. And as I walk toward home, the world feels new again, quiet, vast, and finally, beautifully mine.